Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. And we're getting very close to actually finishing the book now. This is probably the last chapter. Chapter 25. The Coming of the Aeroplanes. Two men in pale blue were lying in the irregular line that stretched along the edge of the captured Roehampton stage from end to end, grasping their carbines and peering into the shadows of the stage called Wimbledon Park. Now and then they spoke to one another. They spoke the mutilated English of their class and period. The fire of the Ostrogites had dwindled and ceased, and few of the enemy had been seen in some time. But the echoes of the fight that was going on now far below in the lower galleries of that stage came every now and then between the staccato of shots from the popular side. One of these men was describing to the other how he had seen a man down below there dodge behind a girder, and had aimed at a guess and hit him cleanly, as he dodged too far. "He's down there still," said the marksman. "See that little patch? Yes, between those bars." A few yards behind them lay a dead stranger, face upward to the sky, with the blue canvas of his jacket smouldering in a circle about the neat bullet hole on his chest. Close beside him, a wounded man with a leg swathed about, sat with an expressionless face and watched the progress of that burning. Behind them, athwart the carrier, lay the captured monoplane. "I can't see him now," said the second man, in a tone of provocation. The marksman became foul-mouthed and high-voiced in his earnest endeavour to make things plain, and suddenly, interrupting him, came a noisy shouting from the substage. "What's going on now?" he said, and raised himself on one arm to survey the stairheads in the central groove of the stage. A number of blue figures were coming up these and swarming across the stage. "We don't want all these fools," said his friend. "They only crowd up and spoil shots. What are they after?" "Shh! They're shouting something." The two men listened. The newcomers had crowded densely about the machine. 3 ward leaders, conspicuous by their black mantles and badges, clambered into the body and appeared above it. The rank and file flung themselves upon the vans, gripping hold of the edges until the entire outline of the thing was manned, in some places 3 deep. One of the marksmen knelt up. "They're putting it on the carrier. That's what they're after." He rose to his feet. His friend rose also. "What's the good?" said his friend. "We've got no aeronauts." "That's what they're doing anyhow." He looked at his rifle, looked at the struggling crowd, and suddenly turned to the wounded man. "Mind these, mate," he said, handing his carbine and cartridge belt, and in a moment he was running towards the monoplane. For a quarter of an hour he was lugging, thrusting, shouting and heeding shouts, and then the thing was done, and he stood with a multitude of others cheering their own achievement. By this time he knew what indeed everyone in the city knew, that the master, raw learner though he was, intended to fly this machine himself, was coming even now to take control of it, would let no other man attempt it. He who takes the greatest danger, he who bears the heaviest burden, that man is king. So the master was reported to have spoken. And even as this man cheered, and while the beads of sweat still chased one another from the disorder of his hair, he heard the thunder of a greater tumult, and in fitful snatches the beat and impulse of the revolutionary song. He saw through a gap in the people that a thick stream of heads still poured up the stairway. "The master is coming," shouted voices. "The master is coming." And the crowd about him grew denser and denser. He began to thrust himself towards the central groove. "The master is coming. The sleeper, the master. God and the master," roared the voices. And suddenly, quite close to him, were the black uniforms of the Revolutionary Guard, and for the first and last time in his life he saw Graham, saw him quite nearly. A tall, dark man in a flowing black robe he was, with a white, resolute face and eyes fixed steadfastly before him. A man who, for all the little things about him, had neither ears nor eyes nor thoughts. For all his days that man remembered the passing of Graham's bloodless face. In a moment it had gone, and he was fighting in the swaying crowd. A lad weeping with terror thrust against him, pressing towards the stairways, yelling, "Clear for the start, you fools!" The bell that cleared the flying stage became a loud, unmelodious clanging. With that clanging in his ears, Graham drew near the monoplane, marched into the shadow of its tilting wing. He became aware that a number of people about him were offering to accompany him, and waved their offers aside. He wanted to think how one started the engine. The bell clanged faster and faster, and the feet of the retreating people roared faster and louder. The man in yellow was assisting him to mount through the ribs of the body. He clambered into the aeronaut's place, fixing himself very carefully and deliberately. What was it? The man in yellow was pointing to two small flying machines driving upward in the southern sky. No doubt they were looking for the coming aeroplanes. That presently the thing to do now was to start. Things were being shouted at him. Questions, warnings. They bothered him. He wanted to think about the machine, to recall every item of his previous experience. He waved the people from him, saw the man in yellow dropping off through the ribs, saw the crowd cleft down the line of the girders by his gesture. For a moment he was motionless, staring at the levers, the wheel by which the engine shifted, and all the delicate appliances of which he knew so little. His eye caught a spirit level with the bubble towards him, and he remembered something, spent a dozen seconds in swinging the engine forward until the bubble floated in the centre of the tube. He noted that the people were not shouting, knew they watched his deliberation. A bullet smashed on the bar above his head. Who fired? Was the line clear of people? He stood up to see, and sat down again. In another second the propeller was spinning, and he was rushing down the guides. He gripped the wheel and swung the engine back to lift the stem. Then it was the people shouted. In a moment he was throbbing with the quiver of the engine, and the shouts dwindled swiftly behind, rushing down to silence. The wind whistled over the edges of the screen, and the world sank away from him very swiftly. Throb, 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 throb. Up he drove. He fancied himself free of all excitement, felt cool and deliberate. He lifted the stem still more, opened one valve on his left wing and swept round and up. He looked down with a steady head and up. One of the Ostrogite monoplanes was driving across his course, so that he drove obliquely towards it and would pass below it at a steep angle. Its little aeronauts were peering down at him. What did they mean to do? His mind became active. One, he saw, held a weapon pointing, seemed prepared to fire. What did they think he meant to do? In a moment he understood their tactics, and his resolution was taken. His momentary lethargy was past. He opened two more valves to his left, swung round, end on to this hostile machine, closed his valves, and shot straight at it. Stem and windscreen shielding him from the shot. They tilted a little as if to clear him. He flung up his stem. Throb, throb, throb. Pause. Throb, throb. He set his teeth, his face into an involuntary grimace, and crash. He struck it. He struck upward beneath the nearer wing. Very slowly the wing of his antagonist seemed to broaden as the impetus of his blow turned it up. He saw the full breadth of it, and then it slid downward out of his sight. And with that, we come to the end of the episode, and I do apologise for the noise in the background, but I unfortunately have no control over that as it's construction work. So, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I've just lost my train of thought. Yes, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.